Welcome to the Next Generation Water Summit. I'm Mike Collignon, one of the co-chairs of the event and the moderator for this session. This session is titled Plumbing Game Changer, IAPMO's Water Demand Calculator. Our panelists today are Christoph Lohr. He is IAPMO's Vice President of Strategic Initiatives. As part of his duties, he provides industry leadership through participation in strategic industry initiatives and provides technical support to all IAPMO's business units as needed. He has over a decade of experience in designing plumbing systems for healthcare, laboratory, hospitality, sports, and university projects. He's a licensed professional engineer in 6 states, has his Certified in Plumbing Design certification from ASPE, is a lead AP in building design and construction, and has his ASSE 1280 Legionella Mitigation Specialist designation. He has written over 50 articles and blog posts on the topics of water, Legionella, medical gas, and leadership. Christoph's professional activities in the industry extend into multiple committees, including ASPE Phoenix Chapter, ASPE Society, ASPE Legionella Working Group, ASHRAE Committees, Pipe Trust of Arizona, AWWA Plumbing Premise Committee, among others. He consistently looks to find long-term, holistic solutions that positively impact public health and safety, particularly in the world of water and plumbing. He is a distinguished graduate from the Virginia Military Institute with a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. Our other panelist today is Daniel Cole. He is the Senior Director of Technical Services at IAPMO. He was a licensed journeyman plumber in the state of Illinois and is currently a member of the American Society of Plumbing Engineers. He received the ASPE Scientific Achievement Award in 2018. He has published several articles on Hunter's Curve and the fixture unit methodology. His research focus is on the plumbing investigations performed at the National Bureau of Standards, which is now known as NIST, with a particular interest in the work of Roy B. Hunter. He also has a focus on promoting water efficiency standards for the built environment. Now, at the end of today's session, I'm going to ask some questions of our panelists. Now, if questions that you may have don't get answered, please enter them in the chat box, and we will attempt to answer them shortly after the summit. Gentlemen, welcome to the session today.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike, for having us on here.
Well, I tell you what, guys, the water demand calculator is something that I'm hearing about, and it feels to me like it's this incredible phenomenon that is starting to grab hold in here and there, but it's something that is just ready to burst on the scene. And I am so excited that we get a chance to talk about it today because from what I'm hearing with cost savings and just the way it's revolutionizing plumbing, it sounds to me like this may be, as I've actually had another expert tell me, one of the most progressive things that is happening in plumbing right now. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And you mentioned that it's gaining momentum. As of today, the state of Washington and the state of Oregon has adopted the water demand calculator. And I do know that the state of California has its eye on it. So they're going to be discussing it as well. So it is gaining attention, like you said, and it is gaining momentum, and people are looking at it, most certainly.
Oh, that's great news. And I think before we really delve into why this thing is so phenomenal, can you share with me a little bit about where did this come from? Why did we need this water demand calculator? Because hindsight's can be 20/20, but we're not at the hindsight part yet. So share this wonderful vision that you all have with this water demand calculator. Why do we need it, and what is it doing?
Well, and Mike, you're fortunate. You're talking to one of the probably world's foremost experts on the entire history of how plumbing systems have been sized in Dan Cole. So, Dan, do you want to maybe talk about the history a little bit, and then I can kind of fill in some of the more recent engineering observances when it comes to the pipe sizing?
Just to beware, you get me on this roll of talking about the history of Hunter's Curve, and I will take up your whole seminar. So I'll try to keep it. I'll try to keep it brief.
A great seminar on the whole history of the Hunter's Curve. Definitely worth watching. But Dan, go ahead and give the abbreviated version maybe to start.
So first of all, what is the water demand calculator? Simply put, it is a calculator. And what it does is it estimates peak demand. and why do we need that? And every domestic water supply piping design for new construction is based on peak water supply demand. What does that mean? It means that you don't design a plumbing system assuming that every single fixture is going to be on at the same time. The odds of that is minimal. A matter of fact, what are the odds? That's the problem that Roy Hunter tried to solve as early as the 1920s. So he actually was the very first person in history to apply the theory of probability to a plumbing system. Before him, it was like a rule of thumb. We kind of guesstimate on what the water supply size would be, but there was no scientific basis for that kind of sizing. And it was so diverse between jurisdictions, between states, there was no uniformity. So Hunter thought if I could base this on some kind of scientific theory, then we could achieve uniformity across the board. And in fact, that's exactly what he accomplished, because all plumbing codes in the United States have been using the Hunter method since the 40s. So the question, what is the odds? So Hunter used a theory of probability to answer the question, if you have X amount of plumbing fixtures in a building, what are the odds of so many fixtures being on at the same time? And you could use a method of probability, a theory of probability, to derive that answer. A follow-up question is, how certain are you? How certain are you of that answer, that number of, if you have 100 fixtures, that only 30 are going to be on at the same time? How confident are you of that? And probability theory has what's called confidence levels. And you can plug in a confidence level. And what he chose as an engineer is what's called the 99th percentile. So if you look at the bell curve, think of the bell curve. A lot of people heard it looks like a bell, and you go up around the bell curve towards the last tail. That's the 99th percentile. And what that means, that there's only a 1% chance that your answer is going to be exceeded by one fixture. Even less percent, like a 0.01% chance of two fixtures, 0.0001% chance of three fixtures. So it's a very high confidence level that if we use the 99th percentile, and if you size the plumbing system for this many fixtures, you have a good chance that it's not going to be exceeded. And if it is, it's only by one fixture. So that's the rule of thumb that we continued when we designed the water demand calculator, that high level of certainty for an engineer to use, that how do you know that this peak demand is accurate? Well, it's in the 99th percentile. So Hunter developed this for the sanitary system in the 1920s. In 1940, by 1940, he published a document and applied his probability theory to the water supply system. And that's where there's a design curve and there's fixture units. The two work together. You add up fixture units, you go to the design curve, you find how many fixture units, you go up to the curve, and it tells you what the peak demand is. Well, by the early as the 1970s, the engineering community already were complaining that the estimates using Hunter's curve was too high. And there was actually a US commission that put it on their highest priority, that we need a revised system to more accurately predict peak demand. That was early 1970s. And so international think tanks have been spending large amounts of ink and stacks of paper theorizing, how can we do this? But nothing ever has gotten into the plumbing code on how to bring Hunter's curve into the 21st century until 2017. So in 2017, we published and codified the water demand calculator in an American national standard called WESTAND, the Water Efficiency and Sanitation Standard. And then the following year, it was published in the 2018 Uniform Plumbing Code, another American national standard. So the water demand calculator is now codified in 2 American national standards, so that if you're not under the Uniform Plumbing Code, you can adopt the WE stand, which is a water efficiency code that can be applicable for any plumbing code. It could be like an overlay code of water efficiency and can be used. So that we feel that we have resolved the problem of overestimating demand and oversizing pipes. That was the complaint back in the 70s. To date, the water demand calculator is applicable for single family and for multifamily dwellings. The calculator can work, the algorithms in the calculator can work for any type of building, but we need parameters. We need the parameters for other types of buildings other than single family and multifamily buildings. So I'll just kind of stop there. That's kind of a brief sum of what the water demand calculator is and the need for it.
Well, it's amazing to me that, this work basically started about 100 years ago, and we've finally gotten to this point. It's incredible to look back, and you talk about the level of confidence. It gives me flashbacks or nightmares to my college statistics classes. But Christoph, can you talk to me a little bit about these oversized piping concerns that Dan's talking about? I mean, what are some of those issues from an engineering perspective?
So, and actually, one of the things, I guess, Dan, and correct me if I'm wrong here too. I mean, one of the things I want to make note of to kind of touch on what and the way Dan explained it to me at one point is, when you look at that 99 percentile, that's talking about kind of a congested use type of occurrence. So what you're talking about is basically, imagine somebody's washing their hands at a sink, right? And then they step away and somebody else comes right after them to wash their hands. That's in essence what the 99 percentile sizing criteria gives you. But how many buildings actually work that way? Not many. I mean, sports stadiums to some degree, and maybe you want a little bit better, safety confidence for the super flush condition, opera houses at intermission, movie theaters, that kind of stuff. But for the most part, most buildings don't work that way, but we've been sizing buildings that way. And that kind of comes into my own personal story. In my engineering career, I did a lot of healthcare. That's probably my biggest specialty. My mom was a nurse. My grandfather was an engineer in the automotive industry. And so I found a way to kind of combine my career doing plumbing system design and predominantly healthcare facilities. And I was doing this hospital project here in the West, and we needed to look at their softener sizing. And this was kind of the first point where I became aware of it was, I was looking at Hunter's curve, and I was coming up with this really huge number for the size of the softener. And the softener manufacturer at the time was actually pushing back, saying that there's no way this facility will use this much water. And I was like, but this is the Hunter curve, what it's coming up with. And so what they actually did is they put an ultrasonic flow meter on the hospital, and they measured data for 2 weeks. And sure enough, it was a third of the peak GPM flow rate. And I started doing some digging and some research, and I looked, and I ended up getting in touch with a professor by the name of Dr. Stephen Buckberger out of University of Cincinnati. And then he was the one, this was like 8 years ago now, was like, oh, you should really reach out to Dan Cole with the International Association of Plumbing Mechanical Officials, IAPMO. And so I reached out to Dan, and that's how Dan and I got in touch. Golly, I think at this point, Dan, it's been about 8 years where I started first pestering you about Hunter's curve.
Sure.
But that's kind of one of those engineering problems is, we have been oversizing equipment. So there's a number of issues that can come from that standpoint. So oversizing equipment and piping. So first off is just more cost and material. I mean, if you're going from one size to another, you're going to pay more. So there's issues there, and especially if you're going from from 2 softeners to 5 softeners, there's a huge impact cost there in brine, and operations and everything else. But especially over the last 5 to 10 years, we've also started realizing that part of the challenges that we've had in the U.S. is we've been oversizing our piping systems to such a degree that the disinfectant in our water, which has kind of a half-life, if you will, has a shelf life to it. It'll dissipate in the line before it gets to the facility, to the building that you're trying to have disinfectant in. And one of the kind of dirty little secrets of disinfection is that there's no disinfection out there that's 100% effective. You're typically dealing with a sort of logarithmic reduction or a partial reduction. So we're having a situation where the disinfectant is not making its way to the building. It hasn't killed 100% because no disinfectant can do that. And then we have the bacteria or these pathogens in the water that are outlasting the disinfectant coming there. And so we've kind of had this sort of, my understanding is we've had this sort of band-aid of solutions and trying to revise pH or add corrosion inhibitors or add more disinfectant or change the disinfectant. And all these things haven't been really looked at holistically because we haven't really gone back and evaluated the way we size piping systems in the first place. And to me as an engineer, that's the beauty of the water demand calculators. It's really that first step. And again, it's single family homes and multi-family homes. I mean, we're very targeted right now with what we're looking at, but it has a very big impact when you consider the amount of buildings. And like here, my home state of Arizona, Phoenix, there's the housing prices and apartment prices continue to go up as a result of housing shortages. And so, there's some really big ways that this could help potentially be part of that overall solution. Try to maybe make a dent in on that. So looking at it from an engineering standpoint, yes, there's a cost component from materials. There's a cost standpoint from an operational standpoint, but there's also a health and safety component to this too, that we're just now starting to really dig into and understanding that oversized piping can cause water quality issues. And then last but not least, I'd be totally remiss if I didn't talk about sustainability. And the larger the pipe, the more water you're storing in there. And then, if you're going through and trying to flush out a building to make it safer, because of the water age increasing because of, a pandemic shutting down the building or a house, a cabin, let's say that's not occupied as much, or a house that's not as occupied as much. If you reduce the pipe size, you've now reduced the amount of volume of water that's being stored. So that means you've also reduced the amount of volume you need to flush out in order to bring fresh water into it. And so these are this wrestling of competing variables that engineers are looking at that we're kind of starting to realize. They're all related and they all interface with each other. And we got to kind of look at all of them together to try to solve as many of them together.
So let's talk a little bit about how this calculator works. Dan, do you think you could kind of walk us through it?
So here's the basic template. When you download the water demand calculator from the IAPMO site, you'll see that this is a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. When you do download this, and try to open it, you will get a warning as any spreadsheet that contains macros. So this does run on macros, but you don't have to worry about any kind of infection on your computer. Just accept it and that this is a trusted site. So you see that there are blue cells and there are white cells. The blue cells are locked. You can't change anything in the blue cells. The white cells are for your input. So instead of fixture units, you're entering the actual number of plumbing fixtures in this column. And you'll see that the populated fixtures here are typically found in single-family dwellings and multifamily dwellings. If there are other fixtures that are not in this list, we provided additional rows. For example, if you had a kitchen pot filler, a kitchen pot filler has a higher flow rate and it's not in the list. I've seen dog baths. They're really not bathtubs for people. They're smaller bathtubs for dogs. You could put that in here. Any outdoor water fixture, like a hose bib, lawn irrigation, anything for outdoors is not applicable for the water demand calculator. You would have to add that flow rate to the predicted flow rate in the output here. So you would not include hose bibs here, lawn irrigation, any outdoor pools, stuff like that. You would not include here. So you would populate, and I'll do this for an example. If there were 2 showers and say that there were 4 lavatory faucets, 3 water closets, and you had a dishwasher, you had a kitchen sink, you had a clothes washer, and you had a laundry sink. So those are all the plumbing fixtures in this example. You would click the green button, Run Water Demand Calculator, and then the output is populated on the right-hand side. So it will tell you the number of fixtures that you just inputted into the calculator. Here is your peak demand flow rate, and here it estimates at 11 gallons per minute. The bottom here is a stagnation probability. So this is interesting too. There's a 72% probability that no flow is going to occur in a single family, in this example of the single family residence. As you get into larger buildings, you'll find that that stagnation probability starts dropping off even to zero in large buildings. But in a smaller single family dwelling, there's a large probability that there is no flow at all. And the Hunter number is just the expected number. It helps the calculator know what algorithm to use. And actually, if you go on the IAPMO website, there's a chart on the landing page where this Hunter number becomes applicable, and you can see which algorithm was actually used in this calculation. You can download your result. You can change your units to liters per minute or liters per second, and you can clear it. You can reset it for the next calculation. If you have a multifamily dwelling, there's a drop-down button that tells you to select multifamily, and notice that 2 additional boxes open up. So if the number of apartments in this building, say, is 20, and you want to calculate the water service coming into the whole building, you would enter 20 here. Suppose you're calculating the peak demand just for one riser, and the one riser is only supplying 10 units, then you would put the number 10 here. However number of units you are calculating, you would put that number in this box. And then you would do the same thing. You would enter in the number of fixtures that you're calculating. So it's 10 units. Let's put in 20. Combinations. Let's put in 40 lavatories, 30 toilets, and dishwashers, 10 kitchen sink faucets. Say they each have their own individual clothes washers and laundry sinks. So you would run calculator, and here's the output. And notice the stagnation probability has just dropped from 72 to 14%. So the more fixtures that you have, the larger the building, the less probability of stagnation. But for this, for 10 units, 18.9 gallons per minute with 130 fixtures. So, I mean, if you do this using current methods, using the Hunter method, the predicted flow rate is going to be much higher because it assumes congested use. And looking at this stagnation probability, you know that this is not a congested use application. There are not people standing in queue to use the facility one right after the other. That doesn't happen in single family dwellings. So the estimated peak demand is much lower and more accurate for pipe sizing.
And I think it's important to note too that you're entering the total number of fixtures for the total apartments in the calculation, not total number of fixtures in each apartment. There's a little bit of a difference there. You got to do, the addition of them all, right?
In this example, I chose to just size for 10 units instead of all 20.
Right.
So you would include all the fixtures in all the 10 units.
Right. Okay, great. Now, let's talk a little bit about the financial aspect of this, the economics, because I think a lot of us care about the sustainability aspect of it, that green, but there's also the reality of this green, meaning the money of it. And so, Christoph, do you think you could kind of expand upon the potential savings that can be found by utilizing this?
Definitely. And Dan and myself, and Hugo, we worked with a engineering consulting firm known as Stantec. Pete DeMarco sort of was the brainchild with IAPMO to kind of to lead that charge. But the four of us, we kind of worked with a number of folks at Stantec to kind of do that review. And that was really exciting to kind of go back through and take a look at the change. I mean, and from Dan's example, I mean, looking at the general Hunter's curve, I mean, if I looked at the right numbers, I think it's about 2.5 fixture units per gravity flush tank. And so, looking at Dan's example, he estimated, I think, what was it, that last example you just ran through, Dan? It was like a peak flow rate of like 18, 20 GPM.
18.9, yeah.
Yeah. So just taking a quick look at the general Hunter's curve, I mean, just for those just using the toilets, not even accounting for the bathtubs, for the faucets, that ends up being 2.5 times 30 is, I think, about 75 fixture units. And when you look at the gravity type tank, you're looking at a flow rate close to 20 to 30 GPM. So just by using this to account for the difference, just by you're already reducing it quite a bit by using this different probability. Which is pretty incredible. So when you look at, obviously, when you're having less flow rate, you can reduce the pipe size. And that's that Stantec report that we had worked on. And when you look at the numbers from that Stantec report, it really, all of a sudden, it starts becoming very apparent that this is a very powerful tool for developers and for builders and for plumbing contractors to help reduce the impact that codes can have from a cost standpoint on the built environment. And so when we worked with Stantec, we looked at a number of different areas across the country. We looked at, sort of the higher cost markets, and we looked at the lower cost construction markets. And then we looked at a couple of examples in between. And what we found was, and then we evaluated PEX and copper. And what we found was that there were savings, for copper, utilizing copper in a single family home of up to 11%. And then on the multifamily side, we found savings of up to 13% utilizing copper. Meanwhile, on the PEX side, again, we saw ranges anywhere up to about 8%, up to 16% in some instances. So again, that's kind of a higher level range, but can kind of give your audience an idea of what kind of savings are possible out there in terms of material costs just by utilizing this tool to reduce the pipe sizing. Worth noting, so that report is actually right on the IAPMO website. And Mike, I think I sent you the link. So if you want to share that, in the description of this with the audience members, by all means, go through it. We went through it as a team on multiple iterations. Stantec was absolutely fantastic to work with, and we were very, very detailed and looked at those numbers every which way we could. So we feel very confident in that study, and hopefully that gives the engineering and developers and builders a lot of confidence in what we're putting out there. The other report, which has not yet come out, but is in process, should be released here. We're recording here at the beginning of May, so hopefully in the next couple months here at the latest, is a study we did with AWE that looked at water meters, and that was kind of another angle to this that we didn't, necessarily, that the Stantec report didn't include, but it's another angle to this because we all know connection service fees can cost quite a bit of money. And obviously, if you can reduce for a single family home, from a 1 inch down to a 3/4 inch, you'll see some cost savings from a connection fee standpoint. If you're doing a whole development of 50 houses, I mean, that's just going to compound on itself, for every single home. And so on a per home basis, we saw roughly in a range, for a single family home around maybe, if you were able to reduce from let's say a 1 inch to a 3/4 inch, around $3,000 on average, right around that mark from location to location. But you start talking about a multifamily building, something where you have multiple levels, and you're trying to reduce the for some of these risers, like that example Dan went through. Now you're starting to reduce maybe 1 or 2 or 3 pipe sizes. And so, if you're in an instance where you're reducing, down 2 pipe sizes, I mean, in essence, you could potentially expect to see even bigger savings in there. Let's say we had a 6-inch to a 4-inch. I mean, you could start seeing an annual savings of $4,500. Depending on the size of your facility. So again, there's a lot of opportunities to have this reduction time and time again, on the water system, on the construction side of it. And not only is it more sustainable because you're having less water in there, that water quality component, there's considerations there that can potentially help improve, but you're also saving money. So it's really one of these really amazing ways to get a sort of a win-win-win scenario when you're looking at, from a sustainability, safety, and cost savings, that 3-legged stool.
Yeah, just to piggyback on Christoph, the Stantec report was really indifferent. They used the Uniform Plumbing Code and the International Plumbing Code and the International Residential Code, and they compared all of those to the water demand calculator, and it pretty much was as we expected for the lower end, just for the single family home, from 2 to 7%. PEX was even less savings, 1 to 3%. And that's because the way we let the engineers design the system the way they want to. We didn't direct them on how to design it. They chose the design. We kind of chose, helped with the sizing of the buildings. And so, how many square footage, but they chose the design, and they chose a manifold system. So a lot of home runs in a single family housing, so that didn't affect the pipe sizing at all. It affected the pipe sizing on the water service coming in and the main branches, but then not in the home runs, because those were just all individually run. There's no probability. It's a flow rate to a single fixture. But as you got into the larger units, we started to see higher percentages of savings. And overall, you can expect from the Stantec report, you can expect construction cost savings using the water demand calculator versus any other plumbing code that may be used. I actually brought up after I saw the Stantec report, I brought up about connection fees. I was a plumbing inspector for a jurisdiction. And in the jurisdiction that I was a plumbing inspector, everything was pretty much landlocked. So people were building up and they're expanding their houses. So they would put a second level on their house. They would have a master bathroom and maybe an additional bathroom. So we're recalculating the water supply fixture units. And now your 1-inch service has to be increased to 1.5 inches. And now they're looking at connection fees, tens of thousands of dollars, tap fees, connection fees, increase in water meter sizes. And this really became a problem in the whole state of Illinois, where our Department of Public Health had to address it. Because people were outraged with this cost, of adding on to their homes. So the connection fee issue is really significant. And when the AWE report came out, and they did an excellent job on their data collection, the cost savings is so significant. As you read this report, the larger the meter, you're saving hundreds of thousands of dollars on connection fees. If you reduce your service fee or your service size from 1 pipe size to 2 to 3, it's just a significant savings. And they kind of showed a trend, and you can expect a 23% reduction overall for connection fees, which is really significant.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can't wait to get my hands on that report and check that out.
And one clarification real quick. So I went back, I think I misspoke a little bit earlier. But so if you look at like a 3-inch down to a 1.5 inch, you're talking about, a potentially median cost savings that we found about right around $15,000. The annual water savings, as water service charge savings, we found again in the range of right around $1,000 a year. So, again, there's this short term, the initial builder impact, reducing cost of materials and reducing the cost of construction. But there's also an operational standpoint that kind of answers that other question that a lot of engineers ask. And the other thing to note too is it's a lowering in cost of materials, but obviously you still have to install the same pipe as before. So from a labor standpoint, I wouldn't expect to see that much of a difference, even though the pipe maybe goes down by one pipe size. I think that, labor would expect to see them out the same. So there's really, again, there's a lot of incentive to use this by the various stakeholders that are part of the construction process.
This just sounds phenomenal, Dan. And I guess the question is now, if a jurisdiction wants to enable their local building community to use this incredible tool, how would they go about it? Because we did talk early on about the UPC. We talked about it being in Appendix M. We talked about We Stand as well. What about for places that maybe haven't adopted those two standards yet?
I guess let me jump in here, Mike, because I think that, we can start like at the small base level and then we're kind of work our way up. So before we get to, jurisdictional level, I think we need to kind of talk about the background. So any engineer, or somebody that's signing and sealing the plumbing drawings for a residential home, could utilize the water demand calculator. Now, the challenge, as Dan so eloquently put at the very start of this, and that's why it's understanding the context and the history so important, is the Hunter's curve has been the default method for the entire design, plumbing design community for the last almost 100 years, 80 years at the very least. And so we've to deviate from that in the current regulatory environment in the U.S., it will be a challenge, in part because when you look at the design professional, since they're the ones that put their stamp and seal on the drawings, they're taking responsibility for that system. And there's a very, that way we have set up our system here in the U.S. leads to a lot of risk mitigation. Engineers are very cognizant of not trying to utilize something that puts them out on a ledge. They want to stay at the safety of the middle of the cliff, as it were, the plateau. They don't want to be right at the edge of the cliff. And so anything that deviates from the way it's always been done, there's a lot of sort of systemic inertia that needs to be overcome. So in spite of all those benefits, certainly the builders, the developers, they can certainly encourage the engineering community to go ahead and utilize this fantastic tool to save them money on construction. And they could do that on a case-by-case basis. Now, part of that systemic inertia that would need to be overcome is if a local jurisdiction hasn't adopted the water demand calculator, then what the engineer needs to do, in essence, is to apply for a variance in many locations. Maybe not every instance. Some codes have language in that says that alternate means, third-party means can be approved, which the water demand calculator certainly is. I mean, this was a collaboration between IAPMO, ASPE, which is the American Society of Plumbing Engineers, and the University of Cincinnati, which did a lot of the work. So, I mean, it's as third party as you can get, and was looked at, again, Dan and the entire task force. I mean, I wasn't involved in it. I came on later, but I was aware of it, and we did a presentation at ASPE. I mean, they did a lot of really amazing work. So, yes, it's third party and can comply with that, but a lot of jurisdictions still say basically it's the Hunter's curve or nothing else. And so if you're in one of those jurisdictions, the engineers then have to apply for a variance, which can take time. You're talking 3 or 4 months that are lost in the process. But again, it very well may be, obviously it's very much worth it from a cost standpoint, but it can be a very onerous process. And so that's why the more effective means it would be for a local jurisdiction, whether that's your city, your county, or your state, to adopt Appendix M from the UPC in its entirety as either an amendment or part of the code. So obviously the Uniform Plumbing Code, which includes Appendix M, would be a great way just to adopt it in its entirety and move forward from there. But there's other codes out there. There's non-UPC codes, and the beauty of Appendix M is that it could interface very nicely with just about any. Well, it does. It would interface with every other code out there from a plumbing standpoint. So that would be the best sort of approach, and that basically eliminates that risk concern from the engineer, from the design professional, because if the local jurisdiction has adopted it as part of their code, that basically gives them this shining big green light that says, risk standpoint, needing to worry about something, not working. They've gotten the green light on multiple fronts, because most plumbing designers and plumbing engineers will look to the codes to kind of encourage them on certain paths. And so there's that big step. Now, there's other means out there, and Dan could probably expand on that a little bit, as far as, adopting We Stand, which is a stretch code, or other means of trying to get it in there. But, in essence, I would say the best way out there, in my opinion, and Dan, feel free if you want to tell me if I'm wrong or not, but I would think it's to, at the very least, adopt Appendix M as code for the local jurisdiction or for the state of jurisdiction, because that's going to open the door for this kind of savings across the entire state.
And I perfectly agree with that method. One of the things that I could mention too is that the next edition of M22 from the American Water Works Association is going to contain a large rewrite of Chapter 4 and will include the water demand calculator for single multifamily dwelling. So if you have the AWWA behind you, allowing water service size and meter sizes using this method, that holds a lot of weight in communities, especially with the water purveyor, and could help the engineer as well. So that revision is currently under chapter review right now. So it might have another year yet before that edition is finally published. But it's been very accepted by the committees, the working committees. So we do expect to see that in the next edition. So that'll be very helpful. A lot of water purveyors, they default to the AWWA Manual 22 instead of the plumbing code. So that's helpful. But jurisdictions that have not adopted Appendix M, or jurisdictions that do not use the Uniform Plumbing Code, their option is, like Christoph said, a variance, or you can adopt the We Stand. The We Stand, like Christoph said, is an overlay code. It can be used with any plumbing code that the state has adopted for water conservation, water efficiency, and the water demand calculator is there as an alternative method for estimating peak demand with water conserving fixtures. So there are options for an engineer to use.
We've talked a lot today about single family, multifamily building types, but is this something that could be applicable to other building types? Maybe if not now, then maybe down the road a little bit?
Definitely. And I'm glad you asked that question, Mike, because, we're very excited. Dan and I have, since I joined IAPMO, we've been having a lot of conversations. And one of the things that became apparent to Dan and I was that we need to kind of take this to the next level. And so we put our heads together, and we are really excited that this November 4th, IAPMO will be hosting a virtual water demand calculator summit. And in that summit, we're going to have, it's going to be about a 6-hour summit, virtual again. Cost will probably be around $40, $50, somewhere in that range. That's what we're thinking. And there'll be CEUs offered. But in that CEUs, we're going to have Dan and Professor Stephen Buckberger and Tim Wolf, who made up the task force for the water demand calculator from a few years ago, talk about sort of the ghost of Roy Hunter, past, present, and future, if you will. And talking about the water demand calculator, especially in the present and future context. In many ways, it's an expansion of the seminar that the four of us gave at the American Society of Plumbing Engineers conference in Atlanta, Georgia, back in 2018. And in the afternoon, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the nuances. We're going to have some discussions about from some water treatment manufacturers and service providers about using ultrasonic flow meters and the data that they've collected. So we're going to review some of the data specifically in hospitals, and then we'll have maybe an engineering firm talk about machine learning and data collection and understanding how to use that data in creating, in updating, codes and standards. And what we hope is with a larger panel discussion in the afternoon, We're going to give audience members a chance to talk and ask questions with our panelists. And that's part of the reason why we want to have a cost associated with that, is we want to make sure people have skin in the game when they attend this thing. But we would love this thing to be an inspiration to attendees and folks that can't attend, if for whatever reason, to join our initiative. We're hoping to expand this, and we're hoping to do, to kind of take the water demand calculator and apply it to things like, starting off with like probably healthcare, something that's so critical, especially when we consider safety. But we want to expand it to office buildings, universities, schools, because there's a lot of buildings, as we talked about. That original Roy Hunter concept was congested use, and a lot of these building types out there most building types don't work that way. And so we want to take that to the next level. And there's other things that are moving in the industry that will hopefully, our effort in this way will hopefully help supplement. And hopefully we can get some volunteers, both on the crowdsourcing data side, along with volunteers to go out and to, count up fixtures and to look at the data and provide that to the group, just so we can take a look at it as an industry and really kind of make history in many ways by collaboratively working together to develop the next iteration of the water demand calculator for other building types. So I'm personally really excited about it. Dan, I know, you and I, we've been working in many ways on that, and Dan's got a seminar in there, but it's a really exciting event that'll be coming up again, November 4th, 2021. Mark your calendars. It'll start in the morning, and it'll be about 6 hours during the course of the day. So it'll definitely be worthwhile attending.
And another thing that's going on right now, we've been after NIST for a long time, because this whole thing started with the National Bureau of Standards with Roy Hunter, and they kind of ended their plumbing program, I believe it was in the 80s, where they're not doing any more plumbing research. So we've been reaching out to NIST. And back in 2019, we sent NIST research priorities for plumbing. And one of the priorities, we identified 4 building types: healthcare building types that include long-term care and hospitals, office buildings, schools that include primary, secondary, colleges and universities, and then hotels. So we felt that those 4 building types would be the most common non-residential buildings for the next step. So, fast forward, NIST in May of 2020 published a technical note 2088 and had a list, and this was a result of workshops with a lot of stakeholders putting input. And so this 80-page document contains a matrix of all the research needs focused on plumbing. And included in it is data collection for buildings other than residential in order to improve the water demand calculator. So they have recognized it. NIST, that was huge to me. I've done so much research on history past at the National Bureau of Standards, and for me to be involved in NIST present, in reviving plumbing interest, I'm in heaven. So yes, there is in the foresight, including other building types for the water demand calculator.
And as someone who has a software tool himself, refinement is just the constant to any software. So I understand that point of view too, and can certainly appreciate the constant need to refine and look and revise. So let's talk as we wrap up here. What is each of yours kind of top takeaway that you would, if you had 2 minutes with somebody in an elevator, what would you tell them about the water demand calculator?
So what I would tell them is, that there's this great tool that can not only help improve water safety and quality, it can improve sustainability, and it can save money. It's one of those 3-legged stool win-win-wins. And I would, if they were definitely a policymaker, I would encourage them, or if they were a developer that was in touch with the policymaker or jurisdiction, I would encourage them to say, hey, look, here's this great tool, get it adopted, by your jurisdiction, and kind of get rid of some of that inertia that needs to be overcome. And there can be some really amazing things that happen as a result of that for those communities. That would be my I guess top lesson or two that I would have. Dan, what would you have?
Well, if I was in an elevator with someone and I knew that I only had a few seconds, I would say, you can download this on your phone, the water demand calculator. I don't know if you can see it, but both Android and iPhones, download the water demand calculator, play with it, give us some feedback and see how it works for you. But truly, this is a milestone for the plumbing industry. Like we've mentioned, 100 years of archaic methodology that has not really been significantly improved to meet current needs. This truly is a milestone. It's free for download and for use. We have proof that it will reduce construction costs. It will reduce connection fees, and it will create a better delivery system for your water needs.
Wow. I can't tell you how excited I am. The Words Development Group's excited about this. I know the people in the water industry are excited about this. So I appreciate you both taking the time to sit down with me and talk about this. How can people get in touch with you all or with IAPMO if they have other questions about the water demand calculator?
Well, you can find the water demand calculator on the IAPMO webpage. If you go to www.iapmo.org, I believe there's a link right there on the front page, maybe in one of the sidebar columns. If folks want to get in touch with me, you can get in touch with me on Twitter @LohrThoughts, or you can follow me or join up with me on LinkedIn, Christoph Lohr PE, or you can email me, christoph.lohr@iapmo.org. And I also just want to say, there's another, I think we'll make a mention of it here, but there's the Authority Podcast, Plumbing and Mechanical, and the Authority, or @the Authority PM, which is the Twitter handle. Would be great ways to kind of stay in touch and see some of the latest stuff in regards to water quality, sustainability, and affordability concerns when it comes to plumbing resiliency.
And my contact info is dan.cole@iapmo.org. And I'm also on LinkedIn, and you can find me there as well.
Very good. Well, thank you both for sitting down with me and talking about this revolutionary tool that the industry is just starting to unwrap and discover and utilize. And I hope that many, many, many more people use it in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead. So thank you both very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
And thank you, our viewer, for attending this year's Next Generation Water Summit. We hope you enjoyed this on-demand session. It will be available through the event platform for the next couple of months till about early August. But we hope to see you at next year's summit as well. So thank you very much for your time, and take care.